Hi again, this is Jack Downs with now the third in the series of videos for the Dreamweaver tutorial for GLU 317. And this is, in the text, this is part 4. Well, we did 1 and 2 in the first video. So now we're in part 4, which is on page 21. So let's continue from there. I am in Dreamweaver, and where we left off, we had just added links. Now we're going to be doing some additional CSS. It's going to get more complicated and more interesting, I think. As part 4 starts, they tell you, hey, you may want to look at your page in a browser. Remember how to do that? File, preview in browser. By the way, when you do this, file, preview in browser, if you have unsaved stuff someplace, it's going to ask you, again, just say yes, save first. So our page now has links, but they're not styled anyway. Otherwise, it's raw HTML. We did start a style sheet, but we didn't do anything with it yet. So let us continue. The rest of this tutorial series, it explains on page 22, is about CSS. We're going to use the CSS Designer, which is another one of these tabs up here. There it is, to do that stuff. They're going to start with, interestingly, this tutorial is going to start the CSS by dealing with the box size issues and the whole way that box sizes are calculated. This is just interesting thing. We've already discussed this in the box model in class. Just a coincidence. And they explain on the bottom of 22 that, yeah, normally if you have a box that's a certain width, you think you know what the width is, but the true visible width actually is the width you give it plus the border, the padding plus the borders. So the true visible width is wider. However, and then there's on page 23, there is a little description, a little graphic that shows you that. It is true that this is not very intuitive. We generally like the idea of thinking that we set the size of a box. Things like borders and padding come out of the inside of it. And we can make that happen with a little bit of code. You used code like this before in the box model stuff that we did. This page, on page 23, it does mention something called Dreamweaver snippets, which is a way to hold commonly used pieces of code and paste them from there into your project. It'd be like if you always use this certain chunk of style, maybe you always use this basic navigation stuff for HTML, or one thing or another, you could take these chunks and save them in this, like a clipboard, that's just for this program. And that's a great idea, but it does not work that well for you in a lab or a classroom because that stuff can get zapped. So it only is really useful in a in your own setting, in your own office or whatever. So I don't think we're going to use snippets in here. But that's what's mentioned there. That's what it means. Okay, so we're in the middle of page 23 at number 1. With the index open in document view, click responsive CSS, and there it is, responsive CSS. That's how we can go to the CSS document. Good. To open this style sheet, and we are in the split view, right? Fine. Click inside the code and create a blank line on line 2. They're very specific here. We could do that by just putting an enter in here. You can put a couple of them in if you want. Doesn't really matter, remember? I'm just going to put them in like this so you can see it better. And I'm going to make my code area bigger for you too. Good. Now, we are going to make a comment. Remember how to make a comment in CSS? We'll do it on line 2, like they ask us to, I guess. Whoops, not a question mark, but it's the slash. It's near the question mark. Asterisk. And then space, and then asterisk, and then the slash again. And we can see before we got the ending code of the comment, it was going to comment everything else, everything out. And now it's just what's inside here. And what are we going to type in here? We're going to type in the words simplify. Width and height calculations. Okay, good. And now we're going to type in the code. They're going to get some code hints when we do this, which maybe we'll use. We're going to use box sizing. So it's going to be box. Oops, sorry. Sorry. First, it's going to be the selector, right? Yeah. Sorry. First, it's selector. HTML, good, and I'm going to do 2 curly brackets, because I like to do both at the same time, and they are suggesting that commonly we put the open and close curly brackets on 2 different lines. That's fine. It doesn't have to be, and Dreamweaver doesn't demand this or anything. It's just visually it makes it look a little better. I start to type in box. It's not going to give me a tooltips right now, but finally it did. I'm not sure why it didn't earlier. So the box sizing, and now it's going to be border box. I can click on that if I want and double click. Interestingly, I don't know why it doesn't give me the semicolon automatically, but it doesn't. It also doesn't automatically get a space there, which doesn't hurt anything, but I like putting a space there. Box sizing, border box, good. And then, so that theoretically makes that happen, good. But now on the next line, we're going to do a different selector, and this is an interesting piece of code. You know that the asterisk is the wild card. We haven't talked much about inheriting and getting things to inherit. We want to make sure that this border box method of sizing boxes inherits through everything. And interestingly, they put this code in here, in the tutorial even says, this meaning of this style is rather advanced. At this stage of learning web design, all you need to know is that it works. So we'll take their word for it. Okay, well, what are we going to do? We're going to do asterisk, comma, so in other words, everything plus everything before plus, but there's no space between the asterisk and the colon. In these pseudo selectors, there's never a space between the thing and the colon, or the colon and what follows it. It's like one word. After, everything before. I guess that's everything. Curly brackets. And then down here in this next line, we're going to stick our cursor in there and type box sizing inherit. And a semicolon. Don't forget the semicolon. It's not doing that for us. So all we did there is make that border the more intuitive box sizing method. Frankly, we're not going to really use it. Here's something else that's interesting, and now we're really getting into something that is only to do with Dreamweaver. In a way, it's a different way of using a web font. Adobe has their own web fonts. Most people use Google web fonts. But Adobe, of course, does all kinds of stuff with type. And if you've got a copy of Dreamweaver, they'll let you use your web fonts, their web fonts. But they want you to install them first. Maybe this will work for you, maybe it won't. It depends on whether they've already been installed in that computer. There can be some glitches. If this doesn't work, don't worry about it. This is just one way to choose a font. Well, I'll show you what the alternative would be. This is on page 25. Install an Adobe Edge web font. And it talks about how normally, of course, we get the fonts from the computer where the viewer of the website is working, but we could also use free web fonts from Adobe or someplace else like Google, and you've seen one of those already in an earlier exercise. And how we're going to get to it, we're going to say select, we're going to do modify, manage fonts. Modify menu, manage fonts. This is something, it brings up this big thing. These are all fonts that you could use, but you have to tell it you're going to want one, and that kind of gives you the license for it or something. You could go look through all these, but what we want to find is source, and actually the one we want is source sans. Now, I've already done this, so I've got it checked. I'm going to uncheck it, and now I'm going to check it again. All right? So theoretically, that gives it to me. If you do this and you check on it and it doesn't work, or you don't find it there, we want Source Sans Pro. That's the one we want right there. Source Sans Pro. There's also source code. We don't want that. There's also source serif. We don't want that. You can look through and find other ones if you want in that big list. And I'm just going to say done. Theoretically, that's giving me that choice. And I'll find that choice when I go to apply fonts later. And if I don't, no big deal. I will just choose something else instead. So we did that. Good. We did that. Source Sans Pro, serif font. Doesn't have the decorative. It tells you what serifs are and sans serifs are, which you should know. Adobe font is free, but it's subject to a license agreement. Click Done. That sort of accepts that. Good. Now we're going to start with the CSS Designer on page 26, and we're getting more into the real CSS stuff. And it says, you saw earlier how code hints can speed up the creation of style rules in code view. Dreamweaver also has a CSS Designer, a panel that lets you set styles. Style your page while watching the changes happen in live view. In this section, you'll use the Designer to start adding them, the basic styles to responsive CSS. With the index open in the document window, yeah, we've got index open still, okay. Click the live button so the live view fills the entire window. Well, first we have to go to source code. Now they want us now to look at just the live view, okay, because we're going to see things reflected here. That's good. We're not going to deal with snippets. Open the CSS Designer by clicking on its tab in the panel on the right of the screen. Okay, CSS Designer, here it is. Now the Designer, we'll just take a little tour of it. It may look a little different for you. Probably this is down here, and this is down here more, like they're spaced out more. If your screen is narrow, it'll be one column. But you make it a little bit wider by hovering over here, and boom, it switches into 2, which I think is a little bit easier. So I would shoot for 2. So go to that width if you need to change it. And also, I want to make it a little deeper too. So I'm going to squeeze my other panels down there, down out of the way a little bit. And what are the things we have? We have sources. In other words, where is it going to go? We almost always, in fact, let's say always, want responsive CSS checked here. If it ever becomes unchecked, we want it checked here. In other words, we want to make these style rules in the CSS document. And that's the source. So we want that checked. What else? We almost always have all here as opposed to current. All checked on this box here. So this is what applies to all documents. And the @media statements, we are not going to deal with those now. Those will come in a later section, and we'll talk about those later. So I'm actually going to I'm going to slide that up, and I'm going to slide this up too, because we don't really care about @media now. We want to see selectors though. Selectors are what you know. Selectors are the thing in CSS that says what we're going to be affecting. And over here are going to be all of our properties. This show set button, we will sometimes have it checked on, sometimes have it checked off. It would show us the set of things that have been applied to that selector already. But at this point, we only have 1, 2, 3 selectors. So we're not really worried about it. We're going to start really working with wrapper next. So we reviewed that panel, and we went through that. All goes through. You can reread that stuff on page 27. The all is on. The sources we selected responsive. Don't need the media. Select number 8. We're down on number 8 on page 27. The selectors, they say pane. I say panel. Whatever. List the selectors that have got to be created. Last one, wrapper. Hashtag wrapper doesn't have any styles yet. When you create a new selector, Dreamweaver always inserts it at the bottom of the style sheet. So when we start creating new ones, they will go down below here. Unless we do something different, unless we select one and then we'll go below that one. Because we do want them organized in a logical fashion. Of course, you can reorganize them. You could go into the style sheet and just copy chunks of stuff and paste it someplace else if you ended up getting them out of order, if that was important to you. It's nice to have a logical order, that things that are similar go together. So when you're trying to figure out what's happening, you can look in that area and see multiple style rules that apply to that thing. So it's good to keep in the logical order. So why don't we select the before the hashtag before or after thingamajiggy there. Okay, right, good. So that's now I've selected a selector. It gives me stuff I could change. We're not going to change anything there, but if we show set, we click on the show set, that would show me the things that are applied to that. But now we're going to actually deselect that. So we selected this guy, and we deselected the show set button if it was selected. I also showed you what it did. We're going to click the plus bar button on the top left of the selector's pane or panel, I'll say panel, to create a new selector. Dreamweaver suggests a name for the selector based on what's currently selected in the live view. In other words, Okay, let's do it. I'll show you what that means. So we selected this. The only reason we selected this is that we want the next rule to go in just after it, but before wrapper. And we click on the plus mark. It says, okay, well, your cursor happens to be, mine happened to be in the UL. Yours might have been someplace else. Who knows? And because of wherever it is, it says you must want something to do with that. But we don't. We just want body. So we'll just type body in. There's going to be some times when we're telling you, the instructions tell you to do certain things using arrows to get up or down to get the right stuff in this box here. You can always just type in there. So don't worry about that. So we are going to type in body, and we're going to press enter return twice to confirm the change. Hey, it's another one of those two things. So enter once and then again, body. So we have a new selector for body. Of course, we typically have a selector thing called body, which is typically at or near the top of the CSS document, and it's also where we do things that apply to pretty much the whole page. So we're now going to create a style rule that affects everything in the page by setting those properties in the properties pane or panel. And here we go. In the layout section, okay, let's take a look. So again, responsive is checked, good. We're not using anything out media. In selector, we select body, good. We have all checked on, that's good. We don't want show set checked, that's good. What do we have here? We have layout rules, text rules, border rules, background rules, and more. All right, we are going to start with layout section. So I'm going to click on the layout section. It probably is the one that was clicked already. And we're going to look through these. There's different ways to use these. These are all going to apply rules. Nice thing is it'll always spell them right and write them the right way and everything. The thing you may not like is it may feel a little slow at times. So in the layout section, there's a visual tool for setting margins. This whole margin thing, we can click into the sides and set things. However, there's also something called set shorthand, which I'm going to click in there because we just want 0 margins on the body. So in fact, when we use a 0, we don't even have to use any units. So we put the number in there and I can just hit enter and it will happen. So we had 0 on the body. Now you should notice in the live view things did move slightly as a result. The default 8-pixel margin was removed from the element body. Okay, good. The margin property in the properties panel is now, look, it's also, the word margin is bold, and you see those numbers have been applied all the way around, which we could have done that way, but it's easier like this. Good. And then we're down to number 13. Excuse my paper rustling if you hear that. We are going to do text for the entire body. Good. What happens when we click on text? The first thing is color. Color means what we call foreground color, which is color of text and things like borders too. So it's the overall color of the text. And typically, you've often been just leaving this alone because it's by default black, but we're going to use a dark color that's close to black, but not quite black, which your tutorial says, and this probably is the case, is a little easier to read. So what is the color? Well, you're just going to click in this undefined area, and you're going to type, again, don't want the word undefined, I'm going to type a hex code. This is in your instructions. It's going to be 4B, 4B, 4B. Good. And then, of course, enter would take care of it. It's going to show you a mini of what that color is. It's almost black. And you would see that the color of the text here in the live view did change slightly as a result. Not a bad idea on your own page to think about. It's a very small change, but making the text just not quite black. And especially if it's on a white background. But did you notice that I typed those capital B's? It would have worked as lowercase, but I just like the idea. That's generally how we do hex codes. Click to the right of font family to open a menu of commonly used font stacks. Hey, we've got font stacks here. So we are going to go into font family. We click in here, and here they all are. Okay, I have one called Source Sans Pro. So if I click on, which is the added web font from Adobe that I selected earlier. If you have that, good, you go ahead and use it. But let's imagine you do. Well, first of all, let's imagine you do. What happens if you do? Click on it, and what? for Source Sans Pro. It finally changed. It took a moment. Did you see that? In my live view here. It took a moment for it to take place. It is definitely a sans serif, and it's a kind of a light one also. I mean a fine one. So good, that would be fine. And you would see, by the way, if I go to my responsive CSS, and by the way, look at other thing that happened is it added this JS, this JavaScript, which is what's going and getting that font, which is not editable, by the way. But responsive CSS, what happened? It went and put that font family, and we see our rules starting to build up here, right? It put that font family in there. It's just a single one. I guess the idea is that with a web font, you don't really need to have all the rest of it. I actually don't like that. I think it would be nice if you actually had a stack in here, but you started with the one you wanted. This in case something went wrong and the link ever didn't work. So we have other ones that are similar to it. Anyway, but if you did get this, you could leave it like that if you had it. But what if we, let's go back to the full live view. What if we didn't have that, though? So let's go ahead back to text and go to Source Sans Pro. If you don't have that option here because it didn't work, well, I would say, what about, I was supposed to think of this beforehand. I think this stack right here. Let's take a look and see what this looks like. The one that starts with Lucinda. And watch the live view as you try it. Or you can try it yourself too, even if you had the other one. It's similar. It's a little bit heavier. But I think it would be okay. That would be the alternative that I think you should go ahead and choose. Also, if you have to make that choice instead of Sans, which Source Sans Pro, which is what I'm going to do, you have to make that choice. I mean, you could try some other ones. Impact, no. Gotham, no. Arial Helvetica, Gil Sans, let's see. That's way too. That's not right. That'd be no good. Lucinda, no, that's serif. These up here are all serif. You definitely wouldn't want those. And there's a monospace stuck in there too. No, I'm going to go with Source Sans Pro, and if you don't have that, use the other one that I just suggested, which was Lucinda, that stack there, which would be fine too. Okay, it's possible if you have to use Lucinda, if you have to make any fudging as far as the other things that come up here about weight and so on, go ahead and do it. Your goal is to have it look similar to this. If it's a little different, don't worry. It might cause your line breaks to be slightly different, but the whole project will go fine, really. Okay, so we just chose the font, and a big discussion about that. Font stacks are then discussed at number 15, and so on. Choosing a web font automatically sets the values for the font style and font weight, which is interesting. Those properties in addition to font family. There's a new file, as I described on page 29. Up there, that JS file that you see up here. New file hooked up to the page now. It wouldn't be a bad thing to do. File, save all related files at this point. Also, the value for the font is normal is okay. So font style normal is okay. You should have that, and it would be the default anyway. But the font value of 200, if you have a 200 in here, that's probably not that great. And if you don't have anything in here because you had to make the other font choice, you could try changing it to 400, which is what I'm going to do, and see what it looks like. I'm going to change this to 400. Click on here and change 400. Now, we haven't done much. And frankly, that looks a little bit more now like that other font stack looked out of the box. We haven't done, I can hit the enter if I want to. I could just continue with other things, whatever. We haven't done much with font weights that are in numbers. They were mentioned in your textbook. We usually just said bold or not, or didn't say anything, which was normal, right? However, font weights, you can specify them exactly in numbers. It's interesting to see here that the font weight property explains can go from 100 to 900, but then some fonts only don't have access to all those numbers because of the way they're built. These Edge web fonts don't have 100, 500, or 800. I guess that's why. I don't know why. That's what it says in number 18 there. Click alongside the font. Number 19, click alongside the font size to open a menu of units or of measurements and keywords that can be applied to fonts. All right, let's do that. Font size right here. Click in it. Good. In other words, I could just click in there and just type something, but instead I can choose EM, which is what we want to choose. And something terrible is going to happen when we do. All the text went away. Why is that? Because it's represented by default as 0 EM. 0 is not what you want, but it's Don't panic, as explains in number 20. When you put a number in there, it's going to be fine. And what number are you going to put in there? We're going to just put 1 in there. It's highlighted right now, so I can just type 1. I can click in there, and I could have just typed 1 EM from the beginning. But 1 is good, and this is equivalent to, in what we've been doing, we've been usually setting the body at 100%. 1 EM is the same thing. It just tells the text to be the size that it wants to. Good. Well, that's number 21 on page 30. Now on to number 22. Click on the background icon at the top of the Properties pane. Properties pane, background, here we are. This time, use the color picker icon with the red slash. Oh, it didn't change it. Come on. Oh, I see. Let me go back to layout and then go to background. Okay. It was a little stuck on text. I had to bounce back and forth there. Okay, I'm in the background. So instead of clicking in here and actually typing a color, we're going to pick a color with a color picker. So, and this is something you couldn't do in Notepad++. What if you just want to visually select the color, right? It is going to tell us to pick a light blue. To do that, and also wants to make sure you're on the hex choice, which is fine. We are. I'm going to click in the blue area. That's a kind of purpley. I want more bluey blue. And I'm going to make a light one, so I'm going to click in there. Something like that. Maybe different if you want, a little different, but that's fine. I'm not really worried about the number so much as what it looks like. A light blue. Pick the one that you want. And then if I just click off, it is applied. There it is. And it's applied over to my page, I see. Good. So we picked the light blue. Select Show Set at the top right to see all the properties we set for this selector. And it would show them to us if we wanted to review them, just the ones we set there. That's the way to use Show Set, which I will uncheck now. And now we're going to set properties directly in the CSS Designer on page 31. We're going to actually do more work there. So let's say you're already familiar with CSS Explains. You can do things in the More section at the bottom of the Properties pane. Dreamweaver speeds up this process. In other words, you don't have to go through all these menus. You just know what you want to do. Okay, here we go again. We still have well, actually we want source code there, but then we want live view there. Source code, live view, and we want responsive checked on still. Yes, it is. We're not using app media. Selectors will work in there in a minute. Show set is checked off. All is checked on. Good. We're all set. Here we go. Make sure that all button and so on, and this is on page 31, number 1, responsive, so on. So we got ourselves all oriented. We're going on to number 2. In the selectors pane, select hashtag wrapper. Good. Here it is. We don't have any rules yet for that. The hash mark indicates the ID, so on and so forth. Yes, it explains that. You can, it's explaining if you didn't create it, you could create it now. Yes. There's no styles have been set. The properties pane displays only what? Oh, it's telling us to select the show set button. But there's nothing there yet, right? So this is where we could just type stuff in, and that's what we're going to do here. And they're going to tell us what to type. This is for the wrapper. Click inside the add property, and we're just going to start typing. It's going to give us hints, you know, tooltip kind of hints. So we want width. Let's see, where are we? Yeah, that's right. Number 4. Start typing width is what we want. I type a W, and then width is there. I can click on it. Good. And then what is the width going to be? We've already moved over to the next one because we clicked on it. Otherwise, we'd have to tab over there or go click over there. Then we're going to type in 100%. 100%, and I could enter or tab. So we apply the width of 100% to the wrapper. Okay, it's the full width of the screen, in other words. But we don't want it to get too wide on large screens. Therefore, we're going to add another property called max width. I'm just going to click in here, max width, and I accidentally had my caps on, but it didn't matter because I was selecting it there. And the max width is going to be 1,000 pixels. This is going to be px now. In other words, we don't want it to get wider than that. We want it to be the full width of the screen, but not wider than that width until it gets to that width. Okay, good. I hit enter after that. We're going to center the wrapper. Remember how we center size things? With a margin property of 0 and auto. So we'll do that right here too, right? Sure, why not? Margin, margin. And what are we going to do? We're going to do 0 space auto. Enter. All right, good. This is shorthand for no margin in the top bottom, automatic on the left right. It will center it. We're going to add a background color property to this, and the value is going to be white. So we're going to have this situation where the blue is only going to be on the outside, and then what is sort of the margin area, because it's the background of it's the color of the entire body, but what's going to be around the text is going to be white. So we're going to do a background color. So I'm going to click in here, background, B for background. I can go find background color right there, and it's going to be white. I could type, oh, I better spell that right though, right? I could type just the word white here, or of course I could do hashtag FFF, which would be the same thing, right? I hit enter there. So I've got the background white, and we're going to, this would be a good place to save all files, or save all related files, which is really the same thing. Save all is okay too. Save. Save regularly, please. Good. So this on page 32, it explains that the text content is now centered against a white background. If the document window is wider than 1,000 pixels, the pale blue background of the body is visible on either side. There's also a mysterious gap at the top of the page, and the text is flush with the left side of the wrapper div. You'll tackle those issues in part 5. It explains, which we're about to move on to. But let's take a look and see. Now your page should look something like on the bottom of page 32. How do we find that again? Well, we go File, Preview in Browser. Oops, not. Oh, I didn't want to choose Firefox. Shoot. Preview in Browser. Let's go to Chrome. There it is. Yeah, now my Firefox is installing. Thank you very much. I don't really care about my Firefox installing, but it's slowing my computer down. Okay. So yes, we see we've got this little gap up here, which is weird. We're going to take care of that in the next section. We also, our text is right on the edge of the white. That's not good either. We're going to take care of that in the next section. It may look like not much has happened, but what will happen next in the styling will happen quickly because we've set up all of our structure and everything. You should continue to read. There's a very interesting paragraph about pixels and high-density displays. So I'll leave you to read that. It's worth looking at. And where do we go from here, in case you're curious? It's going to get more presentable. We're going to sort out some problems with space, and we'll brighten up the page with images in the next section.